Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the ever-improving No Soundbites Allowed podcast. My name is Michael Vasquez. We thank you for joining us in this adventure of describing the politics that go on in our nation on a personal and local level as often as possible, giving you, the audience, more than just 30 seconds to understand what's going on in our nation. We look forward to joining you as we go. Just sit back, enjoy the ride. Please remember, if you like the episodes, like it, share it, let other people know, and if you can, please donate, even if it's $2, even if it's $5, because it all makes a difference. We thank you, and here we go. Hello, everybody, and I hope everyone is well. Please do let me know if you can hear me. It's always interesting that when we start off, Facebook sometimes plays games with the feed. Maybe not so much now. I hope once we get past, since we are past the election, Facebook may calm down a little bit. But they are known to have problems with conservative commentary. So we'll see how that works out. But I am happy to be here with everyone. I thank you all, each and every one of you who come in, no matter at what point, to listen in, to be involved in this podcast, because you guys make it all worthwhile, and I thank you for that. You are the reason why I do this every week. And I know it's been a little bit erratic the last couple of weeks as we were approaching the 2018 midterms, and I was having a little bit of a hectic schedule, to say the least. I've walked 150 miles just in the southern tier, Broome County region, spending many days out, about 10 miles a day, walking around, talking to people, getting people involved and getting them out to vote for whomever they decide to vote for, because I think it's important. And I think it's very promising to see that so many people voted in this election. Some 40% of those able to vote in Broome County, in the New York 22nd District, actually came out and vote. It's actually a little bit less. It was about 4 out of 4. 4 out of 10, came out, and actually a little bit higher. Almost 5 out of 10, but 4 out of 10 came out and voted, which is in line with the prediction that I had. We were expecting to see about 4.4, 4.7, and we're right in that range. Hello, Patricia. Good to see you here. Patricia has joined us. Now, I'm going to be talking a lot about the results of the election and the ongoing issues right now. In particular, the big thing that a lot of people are wondering about, and I've been asked a lot about, which is, what is an affidavit vote, and what is a provisional vote, and what is an absentee vote? And I want to go into that in depth and to some degree and answer that. And of course, I'm always here to answer any question you may have, especially about politics, to go into anything. Patricia, everybody listening, just give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you can hear the sound volume is good. It's been a little while. I changed up the system a little bit, so I'm not exactly sure if you can hear me as well as I can hear you, or as well as I think it's come across here. So, as I was saying, there's a lot to get people out, to get them to vote. People did show up. One of my predictions, about 4.4, actually closer to 4.7 people out of 10 showed up and voted. That's an important thing. That makes a big difference. And it had results throughout all of New York State, not just in the New York 22nd District, and across the country. And I think that was a wonderful thing to see so many people come out and to beat the projections of almost everybody in getting there. So that was positive. I can say that I was wrong in one of my predictions. I was expecting 177 to 186,000 people to come out and vote in the New York 22nd District, and to have similar numbers across New York State and the nation. And as it turned out, I was very, very wrong. We saw a lot more. And I do have to give it to 538. That's a website, 538.com. They came out with a prediction, and in there you'll notice it says they expected 246,000 votes to come out, or voters to vote in the election, and I initially thought they were out of their minds and way too high. In fact, I stand corrected, and I give them props. They were right. It was almost that number. about 237,000 people have voted, with an additional roughly, I was doing the math before, roughly about 15,000 additional votes that are waiting to be counted. So they're pretty much dead on that, and I missed that number completely. And I'm willing to admit, I got it wrong. The projections on who's going to be the winner is looking like 51%. Whichever of the people who do win, it will probably be about 51% of the total vote. So we're looking forward to that. That looks to be online. Myself, 538, a couple of other pundits looked at it being, we knew this was going to be a top tier, top of the nation race, and it turned out to be correct. Something else that I got wrong, and I'll get into other things as we go forward, but I just want to clear the air here, what I got right, what I got wrong, and what does this all mean. So I do want to say I got something else that was wrong. I did mention, back in February, I think, I had stated, actually even 2 years ago, you can find video and audio of me speaking about this in podcasts, that I expected for Anthony Brindisi to have an effective race, to be competitive in the race. The race would have to cost approximately $16 million. And I was actually wrong. We're looking at, final numbers are not in, but this race was about $20 million. Now, 2 years ago and even earlier this year, when I said that this race would total $16 million because of the competition and so how much the Democrats want this district in the New York area to solidify their upstate standing and remove the Republican influence in central New York, most people looked at me and said, Mike, you're out of your mind. No one's going to spend $16 million on a New York race. And hello, Robin. Robin Scoville-Clark joined us, and I'm happy to have you here. And so people were telling me that I was out of my mind. It's not possible. No one would ever spend $16 million for this race. And in fact, what happened is we saw that about $20 million was spent. So blew me away, blew away every other projection out there, and even exceeded my predictions there. And so we've seen that a lot in this race. A lot of predictions were exceeded, surprisingly, by surprising almost every pundit out there. And Felicia Mitchell has joined us. Hello, Felicia. It's good to see you as well. So those are a couple of the big predictions I had made in terms of how much money would be spent. And God, was it not spent in commercials? The House Majority PAC spent about $4 million on this race by themselves. They were the first ones to start off with their promotions. They started advertising on TV, on the radio, with commercials back in March. And they did not stop. And I believe they spent they spent about $4 million. And I think in the last 2 weeks, they spent at least another $500,000, if not $1 million, in this race, flooding the market, the airwaves, the TV, social media, everywhere. You couldn't click on anything on YouTube without seeing at least a 5-second clip of one of their ads hammering home their message, which, as we see now, is turning out to not be very accurate. And that's part of the results of what we're seeing from this election. A lot of people were saying, well, this will be a good thing. The race ultimately was a race about President Trump. This was essentially the 2016 election done over. And it was a question about, does the nation support President Trump? That was really what the ballot was about. And speaking to people all over the New York region, that's the answer I kept coming back with. This was about President Trump. How does he speak? How does he do international policy? How does he talk with reporters? His interactions, his personality. This was a race, an election, about the personality of the person who is president, and the fact that it isn't as presidential as we have seen in many recent presidents. That's what the big thing was. That, President Trump, he's not like other presidents, and he doesn't speak like them, he doesn't act like them, he doesn't act like other world leaders, and many people found that to be offensive, and because of that, well, they just didn't move forward. That was their big thing. Was that fair? That's another question altogether. Is it accurate? Well, that's a personal feeling. But it was the result of this election. That is, and we see once again, very much like in the rest of the nation, it's in the 2016 election, the nation is very much torn. We're very much down the line, not only partisan, but also not decided. The nation doesn't have a clear answer on are we happy with President Trump or not. Many people are very excited about the economic data, which continues to come out, and gangbusters growth, new jobs, unemployment being low. Everyone is very, very pleased. I mean, when the stock market goes up, that's not just rich people getting rich. That's people's retirement money. That's their money to retire on. And so we should all be very happy as we hear, that the stock market's moving forward and there are gains being made. That means people are able to retire with more comfort than they had before in their 401k. I mean, where do you think the mutual funds get their money from? The mutual funds are investing in the other companies. And when they're doing better, the mutual fund does better, your 401k does better, you have more money to retire with. It's a consequence of these actions, and that's a big thing. Very few people are looking at the consequences of some of the actions. When we see President Trump, and I tell you, take away his Twitter. Take away his Twitter. I guarantee you, if you took away his Twitter, and I spoke with many people about this, and that was a big issue, if you took away his Twitter account, you'd probably see 30% of all the problems that President Trump encounters politically would just disappear overnight. They just would. They'd be gone. But that's not going to happen. We've seen that very clearly. He's determined to continue to tweet, and so we have a very rocky president. Not like we haven't had that before. Robin mentions, I voted for Trump because he was different than all the other politicians that say what you want to hear. I'll take the ugly truth over a nice sounding lie any day. You and many, many of us, Robin, you and many, many of us, and I admit I voted for President Trump. I have no problem with that because I believe he was the best candidate and he had a view that made sense. And you know what? We're seeing the result of that, both in North Korea, where we actually are starting the peace process, which is not an overnight process, and that's been moving forward. We've seen it in his interactions with NAFTA and redoing those trade deals, and that's been coming forward. But the point is that more so, the 2018 midterms elections were about personality. They weren't about the economics. They weren't about the national safety. They were about the perception of the personality of the president, and that had a big impact, especially in the New York 22nd District. And so a lot of Democrats were motivated because they don't like the presentation of the president. They don't like how he speaks. And so that was, and they're still very upset about 2016 when Hillary Clinton lost, which has not been accepted. I mean, if you think that's been accepted, listen to MSNBC, CNN, CNBC, most any of the major news networks. You're going to hear people who are still pissed off and constantly referring back to 2016. It's 2 years later. It's kind of like President Obama. Throughout his administration, he was constantly referring to every economic problem was that because of President Bush, even though he was the one who was in office. And for his entire 8-year term, the economy was the economy of President Bush. Now that we're in President Trump's economy, President Obama is saying it's his economy out of nowhere, 2 years into it, because the first year he didn't say that. He said it was going to fall apart, just like the Democrats did, and they promised that we would go into an economic collapse and a recession. That is what they said throughout 2015, 16, and 2017. That hasn't happened. But that being said, and again, I'm distracting, but I got an hour and a half, so why not? But let's focus on the election, and I'm going to get to the issue of this podcast, which is that what is an absentee ballot? What is an affidavit ballot? How are they affecting you? Because they're going to make a big difference, not just here, but also down in Florida and in Arizona, in several races for Senate, for governor, for members of Congress. We're seeing this have a huge impact. But what is it? Why are they there? What's so important? But I wanted to make sure we had a background and I understood the results as are coming through, and I'm still doing an analysis on this. Many people are. So we're trying to understand how we got here. This is how the election went down. This is what the election was about. Now, the result of that, coming back, especially looking at the New York 22nd, I'm going to use that as an example, one, because it was massively followed throughout the entire nation. It's one of the top 5 races in the nation. And 2, because there's so much money being spent on it by PACs, both by the Democrats and the Republicans. In particular, on the Democratic side, the House Majority PAC. On the Republican side, you had the Congressional Leadership Fund, amongst others. So a lot of outside spending went on in this race. People were paying attention to a small area. The New York 22nd District is not remarkable for anything. I live here. I know this area. The people are great. Don't misunderstand me. People are great here, but there's no economic uniqueness about this region. There's no difference. It matches national averages in many ways about this distribution of population. Income is towards the lower end, but not drastically so. The economy is, well, it's New York State, so everyone's leaving. All the businesses are leaving. People are leaving because of Governor Cuomo and his economic policies, which will only get worse. But so there's nothing remarkable here. We've got no businesses, no government institutions. It's surprising that so much money is being spent here. So much attention has been put onto this location in these races. And so it stands out, and that's why I'm using it as an example. Now, some 237, as I mentioned, 237,000 votes have been made. The difference between the Republican incumbent Claudia Tenney and the Democratic challenger Anthony Brindisi is roughly 1,200, almost 1,300 votes, okay, which is razor thin. We're talking about fewer votes. The number of blank votes in this election, the unofficial number is 3,318, which is roughly about, and I worked it out, 1.4% of the total vote. Guess what? There were more people who voted blank than is the difference between the two candidates right now. More people voted blank than there is a difference between the two sides. So I have to wonder what this is going to turn out to be. This is a nail biter, and therefore they are counting and they will recount every single one of the votes. And I know there are problems that exist that are going to come up. One of them in Broome County, one of the districts in Broome County reported late because of problems with the election machines, which we have seen down in South Carolina. We've seen, it's nothing like what we saw down in Florida, where days later, 2, 3, 4 days on, keep going, where we're finding thousands and tens of thousands of votes are appearing out of nowhere that no other district has ever had happen. It just doesn't, suddenly there's 100,000 votes that came out of nowhere that someone just happened to find, which is scary and terrifying. And if that's not voter fraud, I don't know what is. 3 days after an election, you find 15,000 votes. I'm sorry, there's a problem there. Whether they're for one party or the other, it doesn't matter. You found 15,000 votes magically after the fact, 3 days later. What, no one was looking for them? Are you kidding me? What is this? But be that as it may. So in New York, we had, I believe it was the town of Barker, had a problem with its electronic machines. So there were some votes that were delayed there, worth about 1,500 votes or so. So that brought it down. So there is in question right now somewhere around 15,000 votes. And this is going to make the difference. 5.3% of them, 5% of the total votes out there at this moment are absentee votes. Another 1% are what's called affidavit votes. And these are going to make the difference. These are going to be the votes that actually decide who is in office, who's going to represent us. Whether it's going to be Mr. Brindisi, who would join Representative Maxine Waters, who has already identified, and many of the Democrats are already identifying what their goal is. They're looking to get tax returns from President Trump, how that affects the economy, how that affects the national security, how that does anything for the nation besides prepare for a 2020 election. I have no idea, because who cares? It's his tax returns from the 80s, the 90s. It doesn't really matter. He's president right now. How is that going to affect his negotiations with Russia, Canada, China, anywhere? It doesn't. But that is one of the goals that has been identified. We know that Maxine Waters is looking for revenge. She has been very clear in her statements since the election that she is going to be taking over in the House Finance Committee, and therefore she is going to exact revenge. You would say revenge for what? Apparently revenge for the Democrats not being in power since 2016. That's it. She's upset and wants to exact revenge because the nation has had economic improvements, because unemployment is down, because taxes are lower, because businesses have come back from overseas, back into the United States. This has angered Maxine Waters, so now she wants to get revenge. I believe her words are, "I'm going to do to you what you have done to us." The only thing that was done to the Democrats is we didn't vote them into office in the 2016 election. I don't know why that's such a big offense to her, but apparently it is, and the nation's going to pay for it, according to Maxine Waters. So Mr. Brindisi would be working in line with her, in line with Nancy Pelosi, who will become the House Speaker, and in reference to doing all these things that are not going to help the nation, apparently. That being said, or we have the choice of the incumbent Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, who would be fighting against that. And while the Democrats have taken over the House, there are limits, and the more wins that are on the Republican side, the less the impact the Democrats can have, or at least a delay to it, since they do have to win votes. So that's why the race is important. And this is going to directly influence 2020. Because this race, if you thought you saw a lot of commercials this year, if you thought you saw a lot of spending this year, I will predict right now that in 2020, in this district, you will see even more. We will probably see a match of at least $20 million, if not more, spent on this local race, on the New York 22nd district, no matter which candidate it is. Because the Democrats want to hold on to it until they get to the midterm, until we get to the census results in 2010, and New York will lose 2 to 3 members of Congress, continuing a trend that started back in the 1950s. We will bring ourselves down to about 24 members of Congress, limiting the influence, political influence of New York State, and further endangering us to be successful and to be able to be economically competitive and politically competitive going forward. So we're going to lose at least 2 to 3 members of Congress. This may be one of the districts that is split. I expect it to be split 3 ways, but I know that the Democratic Party has had plans since June of 7 different options on how they can split the district. It's not pretty. It's not an advantage for the public, I tell you that. But that being said, let's go forward. And I know I'm going through a lot of background details. Believe it or not, this is actually the short version, folks. There's so much information. But in looking at this, and I know it's a little dense, and it's a lot of information to try and absorb all at once if you don't do this every day like I do. But it is important. It does matter. This is how elections are being done now. This is how people are influencing you and how to influence your vote and their objectives there. And I think it's important for us all to understand that. And what are the consequences of that? But let's actually focus on get a little more focused here. And I did want to mention, if you want to hear something that was an interesting observation about elections and about the trends that we're going to see going forward, the fact that we're going to see the same kind of political manipulations, advertising that we see with Disney. And I would advise you to check out my Star Wars podcast, where I'm talking about how elections have become like Disney marketing Star Wars. The way that Disney is marketing episodes 7, 8, and 9 is exactly what we're seeing in our politics right now, and it's really disappointing and depressing. But there is a direct correlation. I advise you check that podcast out. You can see it on Facebook. You can see it on YouTube. So let's go into absentee voting. So the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about here today. Absentee voting. Now, as you can see, this is from the New York Board of Elections, and they describe what absentee ballots are. So let me give you a really short, very simple answer. An absentee ballot is the ability for an individual to vote in a region that they will not be in and able to vote on the day of election. So, say you're a snowbird. That's one of the big things. Snowbirds, individuals who spend at least part of the year, up to half the year, in another state or in another state than their home state. So many people here in New York, some of them are older or such, they may have houses or spend part of the year in Florida, and then they come back to New York. So in the winter, they're down in Florida, and the summer, they're up in New York because of the temperatures and climate, and it's a little bit better. But they get to, because New York is their primary address, they get to vote in New York, and they would fill out an absentee ballot. Now, in many states across the nation, you can have, if you're not going to be able to vote for whatever reason, you can just go and do it. You can get an absentee ballot and you can vote for whatever reason. You're going to be sick that day, you don't want to get up out of bed, you think it's going to rain, whatever the reason is. In other states, you can do it that way. That's called early voting. And so you have an opportunity to vote ahead of the election in person and sometimes by mail, depending on the state, or sometimes electronically. And you can do that, but in New York State, you can't. There is no such thing as early voting in New York State, although sometimes people confuse the term early voting and absentee voting. So that's where that difference comes from. If you hear someone said, I voted early, no, that means they did an absentee ballot, which means they sent it in because they weren't expecting to be in New York State on election day. So, simple enough there. Now, let's go forward with it. So that's what an absentee ballot is, to give you the opportunity to vote when you won't be in the state, although you still live in that state as your primary residence. You didn't move somewhere and you're temporarily, you live in New York State, you still live in the New York 22nd District. So you can vote in that district still. So with that said, okay, so we know what that is. And it's very straightforward and it's very simple. Now, this year, we have, as I said, about 5% of the total vote. 12,000 some odd ballots are being looked at right now. Many of these people are also in the military. If you are serving overseas or you're serving in the military, so you may be in a base in, I don't know, Wisconsin, or you could be in North Korea, or you could be in Japan, or some base somewhere where you will not be in New York, you will not be able to vote in your home district, then you can do an absentee with the military as well. So I should include that. The military does it as well. So there's over 12,000 now. In the southern tier region, Broome County, Tioga, southern tier of New York, about 1 in 4 people are former military. So there is a large number of people who are former military or current military in the region, and that's why you see such a high volume of absentee ballots, and we would expect most of those are going to be from people who are either snowbirds or from the military. That's primarily the two groups that do absentee ballots on a regular basis. We know, now that we know what they are, what we know about the trend of those ballots is they tend to trend, and it's somewhere between 60 to 70% of the time, absentee ballots vote Republican. Because the people who tend to do the absentee ballots tend to have Republican traits or conservative traits. being in the military is a Republican and conservative trait. You don't see a lot of Antifa people trying to join the military, which would be a joke and funny, and no, not going to happen. They're anarchists. They're not going to join the United States military. You're not going to see people, the democratic socialists like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You're not going to see them join the military. So you're going to see most of the people, so that military component of those absentee ballots are almost always going to be, or are going to be far more likely to be, Republican and conservative leaning. Many of the snowbirds, to be able to have two homes, to be able to travel between those two locations, many people are former business owners or retirees. Many of them tend to be more Republican, as the saying goes. When you're young, if you have a heart, you're a Democrat. If you're older and you have a brain, you're a conservative. So you tend to see that trend. And that's the saying because, well, it tends to happen. And that's why you see a lot of the snowbirds tend to be more often than not a conservative. So about 60-70% of those ballots are going to wind up voting conservative or Republican. That doesn't mean that they are Republican or conservative. Right now, it's been out there somewhere around, and there's a couple of great articles on this, by the way. You can see, Oswego has a good article about it from the Oswego County News, and also, I have it twice? Shouldn't. Okay, typo. And there's another article that came from the Cortland County News. Cortland County News also had a great article, which I thought I had set up for everybody, and I apologize, error on my part. But two very good articles that go into some of the breakdown of the numbers, who's in each of the regions, in each of the counties, how many votes are absentee, how many votes are affidavits, where we're waiting for numbers to come in, and how they tend to vote. So I invite you to look at those two articles. But we know that right now about 48% of the 12,000 absentee ballots are from Republicans. 39% are from Democrats, and 13% are identified as independent or have no party affiliation. Given those numbers, we would tend to see that somewhere around 52% of all the votes that will be coming in on this ballot are going to be for Republicans, are going to lean Republican. And if that is correct, then you're looking at Claudia Taney keeping the seat for the New York 22nd District for Republicans and winning the race, probably somewhere around 52%. But that isn't necessarily correct. We could see a little bit, there are some Republicans, I'd say about 10% of them, that voted for the Democrat, mostly because of Trump or some personality issues, not based on economics, not based on success of the economy, the national defense and safety. They're just voting based on personalities. And that 10% may not be there. So you could see actually about 51%, which would fall in line with my initial expectation. But it would still be very close. So that's what I expect to see there. So I think I answered, and if anyone's still paying attention, because I know it's really dry information. I know it is. And I jumped around a little bit. But hopefully, if everyone's paying attention, then the question would be on this, and I'm just trying to see, essentially that's answering the question about absentee ballots. It's dry, it's boring. This is your politics at work. This is how our elections go. And you're going to see more of this going forward. And it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. Like I said, part of the problem, and one of the things that scares me, is there is an element of what we're seeing down in Florida that is getting a lot of attention right now. in some of the races down in Florida with the Scott race, is that suddenly votes are coming out of nowhere. And no one knows how many actual votes are missing or need to be counted. And it seems almost as if, as needed, if the Democrats need more votes, they suddenly appear and they have more votes, which is very scary. But what we're also seeing here in the New York 22nd District is something similar. Because in Oneida County, there is an unknown number of absentee ballots. We know that there are roughly 4,000, plus minus 4,000 ballots that are floating around out there somewhere. But Oneida County has not confirmed exactly how many ballots it has and if it has gotten all of the absentees in out of what was expected. So that's a big question that's floating around out there. We don't know. So they could theoretically on Monday pop in and say, hey, we found over the weekend, we just happened to find all these ballots that now have to be counted. And in the vote difference was less than 1,000 votes. And Oneida itself, it's something that can absolutely turn around this race. It's something that can absolutely make a difference. I mean, the two biggest regions where there were votes were in Oneida County and in Broome County. And they also happen to have the highest number of absentees. And we have absolutely no idea how many of the ballots are going to be for the the provisional ballots or the affidavits, which I'm going to get into in a second. So this is scary stuff because we have no idea what's going to happen with that. And these numbers could just appear. And it really, really angers me that we're having ballots that no one expected, no one can account for, that no one has a number on, that just appear suddenly days after the fact. That's a problem, with no legitimate reason on why. We just lost a bunch of ballots, and hey, we found a bunch of ballots. You can't tell me that that doesn't imply voter fraud. It absolutely does. Absolutely tells you that there's voter fraud out there. So that's yet another problem. But that leaves us with 2,488 votes. And these votes are the ones that really annoy me. They're the ones that make me very angry. They're the ones that, God help us, could be the difference in this election. And those are the affidavit votes. I've been mentioning it a bunch. And there's just no way to make this all sexy and fun and exciting. It's just not a fun, exciting subject. But it is an important one, folks. So what's an affidavit ballot? I mean, that's a really good question to start off with. What is it? It's not like an absentee vote, which we understand very clearly. Well, back in 2002, actually 2001, there was an effort to try and increase the number of people who would be able to vote and make it easier for people to vote on Election Day, to try and bring up the number of votes on the election. And that's where HR, House Resolution 3295, Help America Vote Act of 2002 came about. Now, you're going to say to me, well, Mike, how difficult was it to vote? It was exactly the same as it is now. You show up, say who you are, show your ID, and you're able to vote. That is where they ask you for that. And sometimes dead people, when they don't ask for ID, dead people come out and vote somehow. Or people who, 72 people who live in a house that doesn't exist all come out to vote. Or more realistically and more directly to this election in the New York 22nd District, we had people from Brooklyn travel to the southern tier, I know for a fact, in the southern tier and other parts of the district, and they said they wanted to vote in our election for this race, the congressional race, where they're not able to do so. They're not registered, they don't live here, it's not their race, they can't vote on it. Yet they tried. But in 2002, they thought, well, we can fix that, we can make this more fair, and in doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to pass a law that says, so say you just moved, last week you moved, or you just registered, and you want to come out and you want to vote. You're not on the ballots. You're not in the books. No one knows where you're at, or you're listed somewhere else in the state, but you want to vote, especially for president and for Senate. So you have that right, pretty much anywhere in the state, to vote for your senator, vote for the president. So we have to make it easier for you. So they passed that bill. Also, HR 32, what was it again? HR 3295 also allowed, the reason why we have the electronic voting machines are because of that. That paid for those machines to go from the old lever machines, kind of like the casino slot machines. So instead of the casino slot machine levers that we had in the past, which most people are too young to remember, but I remember, we then went to electronic because of that bill. So that's what it did. Now, what it created, to allow people to vote from anywhere in the state, if you just registered, if you just moved, as long as you're a registered, you should be a registered voter, you're able to vote. That's when they created, hey Kevin Dyer joined us. Thank you for joining in this somewhat dry subject, but an important one. They created what's called and if you hear the term provisional ballot, it's the same thing as an affidavit ballot. They're the same thing. People use the terms interchangeably. They mean the same thing. That's what was created in 2002. The ability to go pretty much anywhere in the state and vote. Although you're supposed to only vote for president and senator in some other district. So you're working, you have to go for your job and go to the other end of the state. You can still vote, but you don't get to vote on, say, the Board of Elections, Education Board. You don't get to vote for the Board of Education. You don't get to vote for the mayor of that city. You don't get to do the local races. You get to do senator and above. That's not how the votes are working, but that's what it's supposed to be. And New York State implemented that along with some of the changes to take care of the hurricane recently and adjust for that. So that's what an affidavit is supposed to be. It's a person who doesn't live in your region that's voting, but they're only supposed to vote for senator and above and not supposed to vote for local races, which they vote for anyway. Who are these people? Almost entirely, they are students. These are college students who are voting. So, and we see this a lot, especially in this race. We saw a huge number of people in Broome County and Oneida, in many of the regions, a huge number of people. Even in Cortland, it was large. In Oswego, it was a large number. It was actually almost, it was a huge number. Almost 10% of the vote are people who were students, college students. So this college student is from Plattsburgh, New York, and they're going to SUNY Binghamton, or SUNY Broome, for that matter. And they're going to vote. And since they're not registered in Broome County, or in Oneida County, or in Shenango County, they want to be involved. They want to have their vote. They would go down, and I witnessed this, and I've spoken to many of the poll watchers. They would go in, they would mention, they would be found as a registered voter, but not in the region. They would mention that they're a student, they present their ID, and then they would be able to fill out this provisional, this affidavit ballot saying, I want to vote in this race, and I can. Problems with affidavit votes by students. One, students can make more than one of them. And I know for a fact that there have been votes that have been already counted and already found where someone duplicated their vote. So you had a person who voted twice because they go to one location and then maybe they go to another location and they'll vote by affidavit in both locations. If no one actually counts, both those votes would count because no one would notice them, but now they're coming up. Or they may try to vote in their home region, say in New York City, and then they would try and vote in Broome County, as an example, which I know people did try to do. They came from Brooklyn to Binghamton to be able to vote. In the Binghamton race for the New York 22nd District, I know of several cases where this happened. And I've been identified and I've been told about them. I've witnessed a lot of things. So there you go. So that's scary. You have students who don't really know what's going on going and voting. And actually, Kevin Dyer is mentioned. Kevin Dyer said there were a bunch of students voting at his polling place. And he goes on to say college kids that didn't even know how to cast a vote. The volunteers they're showing them how to fill out sample ballots and such. Yes, they were. Yes, they were. And you're right. I saw it at my polling location. In fact, I know in my polling location, some 25% of all the votes that were taken were from students who were from Binghamton University who had never voted before, had no idea how to vote, didn't know how to fill out the ballot, and were voting on local issues that they didn't know anything about. All they knew is they're Socialist Democrats, and they wanted to vote Socialist Democrat. That's it. That's what they got in their social media. That's what they got in their memes. That's what they're being told that they're supposed to do, and that's what they did. Didn't know the issues, didn't know the candidates, just voted down the line Democrat because that's what they thought. It's kind of upsetting, and it's kind of terrifying that people are potentially going to alter races simply because they saw a meme on Facebook. And because they have the ability to use this provisional or affidavit ballot, they're able to change an election because they want to be a socialist. In this case, as an example, they want to be a socialist and they want America to be socialist. They've never lived in a socialist nation. They've never talked to someone who's been in a socialist nation and lived under that. They have no idea about who the candidates are, what the candidates stand for, what their records are, what their history is. Don't care about the economy of the United States as it stands right now. They know nothing about politics. All they know is they got a meme, and that meme said you should be a Democrat and a progressive, and you should vote progressive on the ballot, and they did. Now, I have to admit, there is a little bit of an assumption on my side, because I can't say that every single college student at Binghamton University that filled out an affidavit was voting Democrat because they believe in socialism. I can tell you that the trend has been in every single poll that's been done up till now, and as I have previously talked about in various podcasts, all the polls show that there is an overwhelming, about 40% of the students in college right now believe in socialism. Their teachers believe in socialism. None of them have lived in socialist nations. Somewhat of a generalization, but I stand by it. I think it's pretty accurate. And they're voting in that manner. The impact of that they have not considered whatsoever. I'll go into that in a second. But they're the ones who are changing the votes. And when it comes down to it, in races like this one, you get to see how big of an impact in them. And it's other races where this has been, except the difference in the number of votes was large enough that no one decided to count or to look at this or to investigate it. But I guarantee you, this is happening across our nation, where we are seeing individuals who have no idea about any of the local politics or any of the politicians are coming out and voting, sometimes voting twice, sometimes traveling throughout the state to vote on issues affecting thousands of lives that they know nothing about. That is what a provisional or affidavit ballot is. It is the ability to influence people's lives without having any idea whatsoever. Now, I do want to, Jennifer Lynn has joined us, and she has a couple of things. I'm glad people are listening in and finding this interesting. I know it's a little dry subject, and it's kind of hard, but it's definitely important because it is our politics. But Jennifer Lynn says, if they were progressive, they would have voted for Howie Hawkins. Actually, I disagree with you there, Jennifer. Howie Hawkins is a communist. Not the same thing. And I know that Howie Hawkins is a communist because I spoke with him. I do have an interview. It's up on YouTube where I did an interview with one other member of the press, and I was able to ask him several questions, including, does he believe in socialism? And his answer was, no, he believes in communism. Howie Hawkins is a communist, which is further out into the woods than what our colleges are teaching students to be. They're more going for that intermediate step, which is socialism. And so they wouldn't look for Howie Hawkins. In addition, Howie Hawkins, who is a candidate on the New York Green Party, which is basically a communist and eco-fanatical group, in my opinion, they only had a ballot on governor. So even if they wanted to vote completely communist, the only choice they have to do so was on that one line for governor, and then the rest of the race, which they're not really supposed to be voting on, would still be on the Democratic line because there is no other option. But that's where slight difference, and I'm glad you brought that up. I'm really glad you brought that up because a lot of people would say that and say, well, there's that other wing. Well, really there wasn't. In the congressional race and for the local races and judge races, there wasn't that choice. You didn't have that option. So they had to vote on the Democratic line if they wanted to believe in socialism or progressivism. Jennifer goes on to say, they voted blue over hatred of Trump. They don't care if it destroys New York. And Jennifer, I agree with you wholeheartedly. You are 110% right about that. And I did start off talking about that this the entire election wasn't about what's going to be the politics of the nation. It was about whether people like President Trump or not, which really has nothing to do with it, whether you like him or not. I don't think that President Obama was an evil man. I didn't like his politics at all, and I didn't vote for him, and I would never vote for him because I can't stand his politics, but I don't think he is inherently a bad person, and I think he had a nice presidential stature about him, about average as presidents go. But I wouldn't vote for him because of that. I wouldn't vote for him because of the color of his skin either, which a lot of people voted on the basis of skin color, because racism is like this huge thing these days. And if you aren't paying attention to the way that you're supposed to vote based on race, well, then you're just an evil person. You should have heard things people were saying about me on Facebook just the day before the election. And most of it, almost all coming from Citizen Action and the very far left. The Citizen Action, Black Lives Matters, Antifa, or parts of Broome County, and a couple of their candidates. Hi, Bobby, I'm talking to you. I won't mention your last name because I don't plan to embarrass you, but yeah, Bobby, I'm talking about you. You're straight up racist. That being said, it's kind of scary. Jennifer also commented, they're the same thing to me, far left, big daddy, huge government, which controls everything. Essentially, yes, they are. Except with the communist viewpoint, it takes all of that and puts it on adrenaline. It just makes it that much worse. And it would take a whole episode on its own to give you the differences between socialism as it exists and how it's usually implemented and how it goes into that. It's actually based on the Communist Manifesto and the ideology of communism. Socialism is the first step of communism. You can't have communism without having socialism. Socialism is meant to be that stopgap until the entire world is socialist, and then you would get communism at that point. Somehow, you would go from an authoritarian, iron glove government, and once the world is under this iron glove of socialism, then somehow it's supposed to turn to peace and doves and unicorns, and everyone will be fantastic and life will be great because all the people with this huge authoritative power will give it up so the world can be communist. That's the nutshell of it. And that is, I believe, one of the most illogical and least representative of human nature thoughts in politics. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have any credence or credibility in reality, in my opinion. But that's the difference between them. And Jennifer, more importantly, the difference in voting on the ballot is that you only have the Green Party option for that communist vote. There is no Communist Party of New York that you could vote on. So you're kind of stuck with the one race, one or two races that they would have, because I believe they went for comptroller as well, which lost miserably. They always do. But you have that one, maybe sometimes two choices on that party line, and then because there just aren't enough of them and no one votes for them, and they never get more than 1.5% of the vote. But that gives you that one choice, and so therefore the next closest thing is the Democratic Party, which is becoming, thanks to people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Bernie Sanders and Tom Perez, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, they're moving the entire party to the socialism. They're all becoming Democratic Socialists, taking the entire party with them, whether you want to or not. This is not the Democrats of 40 years ago. This is not the Democrats of 20 years ago. This is socialism, out and outright. And this is communism, outright, in a way that we've never seen before in the nation. And it's just very subtle and very well marketed, but that's what it is. Now, Jennifer goes on to mention one of our new Democrat state senators, John Liu, has ties to the Communist Party of China. I don't know enough about him and his race to comment on that. I wouldn't be surprised. Again, it boggles my mind that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won her race in the New York 14th district overwhelmingly by about 75%, and the woman has no idea about anything. She's about as politically adept as a wet noodle. Okay, and I'm not saying that because I don't like the person. I don't know her. I don't know anything about her personally. I could care less about her personally because I have no reason to. And I'm not wishing her ill. I'm not doing that. But if I have to assess her political acumen, I would get about the same kind of acumen, political knowledge from my puppy, Khan, as I get from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She has absolutely no idea what she's talking about. She has absolutely no idea how government works. She has no idea how economics works. She has no idea about the real world. She somehow was elected as a member of Congress, probably because she was on YouTube constantly, mostly embarrassingly, but she got elected. There's a consequence to this, that we're going to see a growth of this. We're going to see a growth of groups like Citizen Action and their mantra and their mindset. We're going to see a growth in the Black Lives Matters. You're going to see a growth in the Antifa of the world. And if you've been listening to this podcast, I've been talking about this for over 3 years, maybe 4 years, that I've been saying they're coming. This movement is coming, that we're seeing this trend grow. I saw it 3-4 years ago, and I've spoken about it consistently since then. And this is just, I was thinking it would happen in 2020 or 2022, but in fact, it's happening now. It's starting faster than I thought. And she's just one example of it. And that should terrify people, that we can have politicians who can win simply because they're saying a bunch of bullet points that make no sense but sound good, that have no idea what they're talking about, have no idea how government is run, have this idea in their head of what government's supposed to be about and how it's supposed to be without any credible shred of evidence for that. That's what we're becoming, because someone said you should be in favor of that. And how dare you? And if you don't, you're a danger. That you are dangerous if you don't do that. That's terrifying. That is scary. That is upsetting. And we see this over and over again. I mean, I'll tell you guys something. Just before I came on today, I got some news just to let you know how bad things are getting and how scary they are. There is something that I'll share with you. Newsflash. Newsflash. Okay, folks. So just before I came on air, I received a document from a source about a complaint that was filed with the Board of Elections, the Federal Elections Commission from Washington, D.C. This is a certified receipt that I received that was dated as of November 7th of 2018. And this is in response to a Federal Elections Commission review, an allegation that was put out there about the Anthony Brindisi, the New York 22nd race, in particular about the campaign donations of Anthony Brindisi, who was a member of the New York State Assembly, and to his election campaign for the race for Congress. And based on this document, which was signed by Lisa J. Stevenson, the acting general counsel for the Federal Election Commission of Washington, D.C., the letter that I have now, I just received it, states very clearly that Anthony Brindisi broke election law, but because he broke it into a small amount, it's okay. There was a complaint that was filed in April of this year, April of 2018, alleging that Anthony Brindisi had taken money from his state campaign and gave it to his federal campaign, which is illegal. You can't do that. You can't take money from a state campaign and give it to a federal campaign that you're in. That is illegal, expressly illegal. And it was about $2,000, 2 payments of $1,000 apiece, which violates election law. And in the response dated November 7th, one day after the election, on a complaint that was made in April of 2018, they state that while it is a violation of law, it's okay because it was so small. It's $2,000. And because it was only a violation, since he only broke the law with $2,000, it's okay. That's a problem. He broke the law. That is a violation of the law, period. Stop. This is a violation of election law. He misused the law. He misused money for an election. That's a character issue. That's a question. Why wasn't this response given to the public before November? It was done in April. April, May, June, July, August, September, October. 6 months, 7 months that they had to respond. It took them 7 months to respond to a very simple, documented item. He, in fact, took money from one campaign and gave it to another that is legally prohibited. He did that. It shouldn't take 7 months to get that answer. And the answer, and the reason why it took so long, I believe, is because, well, it's a small amount of money. So they let it go. And he won. So let it go. Since he won, we can just forget about it. And no one will pay attention to this. The public won't know. Even though it's a public document, you can look it up yourself. The public doesn't know about it, doesn't care about it, so it's okay. This is part of that mindset we're seeing out in politics now, where we're telling people, well, don't worry, it'll be okay. We can forget about that. That's not important. Even though it's a character issue, we can ignore that character issue. Because the real thing is how you feel about something. How your feelings are about it are more important than the facts, than the laws themselves. I'll give you another example, which infuriated me. And again, may be in direct result because, again, when we saw these affidavits being submitted, which in Broome County alone was somewhere around the absentee and the affidavits combined, they came out to about 10% of the vote. What you're seeing there, they voted on other races, like the city council, Binghamton City Council 2nd District race for a city council member. And what we saw there is, again, students and individuals voting on that Democratic progressive ballot for a progressive candidate by the name of Dan Livingston. And Mr. Livingston, the thing that really is important, and I did not see enough, I didn't see this barely anywhere. I reported on it, but I didn't see it in the major news media other than one comment once 3 months ago, was the fact that Mr. Livingston admitted to breaking the law. Now, I had people come back and say, oh my God, Mike, he didn't get arrested. Well, I'm talking about in November of 2017, he admitted to Spectrum News that he broke election law on purpose to manipulate voters. He purposefully was trying to manipulate the vote to win an election. He admitted it. It was on Spectrum News. It was November of 2017. He went on to WNBF, a talk news radio program, in August of 2018, admitted that he did that, admitted he was aware of it, and said that he would do it again. This guy won. And admitted, now people say, Mike, you can't call him an admitted criminal because he wasn't arrested, he wasn't convicted. That's stupid. Yes, you can. He committed a crime. He is aware of the crime. He admits that he did commit the crime, and he has gotten away with the crime. That doesn't mean that he's no longer a criminal. It just means he didn't get punished for it. But he's a criminal. That is not in question. If I rob a bank, you don't catch me, and I tell you I robbed the bank, that doesn't mean I'm not a criminal. It just means I'm not caught or prosecuted. But it doesn't mean I'm not a criminal. Dan Livingston broke election law to manipulate voters for his personal political gain. He is a progressive, aligned with Citizen Action and Black Lives Matters and Antifa, and he broke the election law, to my knowledge. This is my understanding, and I may be wrong, so I don't want to align him with those groups. He may not be. I don't want to say definitively because I can't prove all of those groups are where his association is. He is a progressive. He admitted breaking the law. He admitted that he did this crime on purpose to win an election. He mentioned that he would do it again, and he ran in another election and he won. Because the news media didn't want to talk about the fact that he broke the law, never got charged, even though it was publicly aware, and has not suffered. I can't wait, and perhaps I will file a complaint to have him removed because he's an admitted criminal. The question is not whether or not he got convicted. He admitted the crime. He willfully did it. But this is what we're seeing in America. And that's part of the problem, because all of the kids who are filling out those affidavits have no idea. They have no idea. They're not from Binghamton. They don't know what happened a year ago, whether or not they even care. And because he's a progressive and he's identified with the far left, they're willing to vote for him. Same thing with Ocasio-Cortez. She's identified with the far left, a socialist. Then they're going to vote for her. We should be scared about that. That's a bad trend in our politics. Jennifer goes on to say, are those ballots going to change the results between Brindisi and Tenney? Yes. Jennifer, you may have come in a little bit late. Yes, it will. 5% of the race is potentially going to be, it is going to be decided between the absentee ballots and the affidavit, or sometimes called provisional ballots. Absentee ballots are 5.3% of the total of all votes, and another roughly 1% are the affidavit or provisional ballots of students. So yeah, that is where the race is going to be decided. Right now, 48% of the absentee ballots are for Republicans. I would say that roughly 60% of the, probably 80% realistically. Probably 80% of all the affidavit ballots are by students, and those students are going to vote Democrat. So we're going to see a very close race in the New York 22nd District, but we're probably going to see, at the end of the day, Claudia Tenney winning with probably about 51% of the total vote. Probably somewhere around, she'll win by, I don't know, 2,000 votes, something like that, maybe less. It's hard to say. But thank you for asking that question. That's a good question. And I did go into it for a while at the beginning, but it's important. And there's a lot of details in it, but without recapping all of it, yeah, it's the absentee ballots and the affidavit ballots. And I honestly believe that if it were not for the students who did the affidavits, outsiders from the region voting in a race they know nothing about, if we took them out, then you would see an overwhelming, the absentees will make a very strong case and show a very strong vote return in favor of the Republican incumbent Claudia Tenney. But you'll see when the final vote comes out with those affidavits, you may see that balance that out a little bit and make the race closer than it should be, or what is accurate for the people who actually live here, for the actual residents of the New York 22nd District. So you will see that difference. Jennifer Lynn mentions Brindisi is scary. He supports the use of eminent domain for that Utica hospital, stealing land from 40 private business owners and giving it to the hospital corporation. Yeah. Yes, he does support the use of eminent domain. And it's not just 40 private businesses. You're leaving out, I believe there's another 30 private family homes and at least one nonprofit that I'm aware of that are all being kicked out for his hospital. It's WRVO, and I've spoken about this many times over the last several months, and you can look back at any of the podcasts or some of the articles I've written about it. You'll see WRVO has a wonderful article which they got a copy of Anthony Brindisi's email where he states he's going to punish the public for asking questions, and he promises, and he created a group, an organization, to silence the public from asking questions because he wants the hospital to go through. So yeah, he's willing to use eminent domain. He is willing to use state funding for projects for his constituents. He's willing to use intimidation to get what he wants, apparently, based on documentation that's out there that I've spoken about for several months. Yeah, he's scary in that way. And I've known, and just full disclosure, I've mentioned it many times, but I've known and spoken with Anthony for 5 years. I've known and spoken with Claudia Tenney for 5 years. They're people I personally know. So I'm not just speaking about it from a political commentary viewpoint, but also from my personal opinion combined. So I usually separate the two, but I'm very aware of both of them, and I've spoken with them several times over the years and during this race. So I did want to disclose that. But I agree with you, and I think there's a lot that people should know there. Just like I think there's a lot people should know about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You know, the fact that she has no idea about economics. Why in the world do we want someone like that in a wet noodle? Why would we have that in Congress? Because she's a Democratic socialist? That's not a reason. Because she's a person of color? That's a horrible reason. Because she's a woman? A horrible reason. Not because it's bad to be a person of color or bad to be a woman. That's not a problem. If that's the only thing that you can say that's positive about this individual, then that's a problem. You are effectively a racist or a sexist if that is the only thing you can point to and say, this is why I'm going to vote for this person. Then we have a problem in our nation. And we have a problem in our nation. She won. Many people voting for her. It's not because she's got a good economic plan. It's miserable. She doesn't even know how to describe it. She doesn't even know what it is. Her own economic plans, she has no idea what they are. She can't describe them. She can't tell you how they work. Take Medicare for All as a great example. She was asked, she wants to get the entire nation, she wants to get rid of Medicare. So does Anthony Brindisi. He admitted that July 20th in Binghamton University. He lied to the public in the Spectrum News debate. But that being said, so we see the Democrats, they're pushing for Medicare for All, being led by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as their national spokespeople. Fantastic. They're going out and they're saying, we got to get this program. We're going to get rid of Medicare. We're going to get rid of private health care. We're going to get rid of corporate health care. No one's going to have any health care program except for Medicare for everyone. Everyone gets the same plan across the entire nation. Everyone gets the same coverage. Everyone gets treated exactly the same, theoretically, if you can get coverage, if you can get seen by a doctor. Okay, and in that, because everyone in the nation is instantly covered, including illegal aliens, everyone is covered, everyone pays for it, and it will cost $30 trillion, with a T, trillion. It will literally double and possibly triple the taxes for every man, woman, child, and business in the United States. And which is insane and unaffordable. And she was asked, how are we going to pay for this? Her answer is, we just pay for it. How do you pay for things that you save money on? What? That's stupid. That is probably one of the most illogical and most inane discussions of politics and economics that I've ever heard. But yet that's what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez offers, and that's what we're getting for Congress. And theoretically, you're going to see more of it in 2020. I don't know how people aren't terrified. I am. I'm personally terrified. But Kevin made a comment. Kevin says, I want to be sure to understand from what you're saying. This issue with the provisional ballots is being brought to light, and it may result in the election result, as it stands, to be a Claudia win. No, Kevin, that's not what I want. I want to be very clear about that. So there are absentee ballots, there are provisional ballots. Absentees being military and people who live in snowbirds. And the affidavits are almost all overwhelmingly students. The students tend to vote Democrat, far left, socialist. Absentees tend to vote more Republican. There are 12,000 absentee votes. There are roughly 2,500 student votes, or the affidavit or provisional votes. Assuming that all the affidavit student votes stand, which they won't, many will get thrown out, but assuming that all of them stayed, the margin, and assuming that the absentees, which generally go 60-70% conservative or Republican, if those trends are correct, then we would see Claudia Tenney win and have a wider margin of win in the election if we did not have those provisional ballots. Her margin of win would be wider if the provisionals did not exist. But in including them, it will make the race look closer. The problem is those provisional ballots are people who have no idea about the local politics, as has been my experience. And therefore, it's going to make the race look closer than it otherwise would. I hope that makes it more clear. I'm sorry if I wasn't being clear about that. Kevin went on to say, also, I understand this is, as you say, somewhat of a dry topic. Yes, it is. It's a very dry topic. I'm trying to make it as interesting as I can and try and throw out things, but it's a tough one. But I also agree it is incredibly important, and this knowledge seems to be misunderstood in the mainstream. Voters need to be informed. Kevin, you're not kidding there. it's not just you. I can tell you for a fact that I was on the day after the election. I was on WUTQ, and I was on for, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. You can listen to WTQ. They had myself and Professor Luke Perry, a local regional professor who deals with politics at SUNY Utica. And we were both talking about this subject. And we were trying to explain, and it's talk radio, so there's a very limited amount of time. You can't go into detail as I have. You can't cite sources as I have in this opportunity. But what we did is we tried to explain the impact, both what are affidavit and absentee ballots, especially the affidavit ballots, which many people were very confused. And this is the first year where we've seen so many of them. I mean, literally, there's a handful on any given year. There was a slew of them throughout Binghamton, throughout Oneida, as I understand, that came in and altered the results that are very important. And people are not familiar with this. They don't know about the 2002 Act of Congress that made this possible, that potentially can increase or cause voter fraud, both intentionally and unintentionally. So it's an issue that, and I'm talking about, WTQ, this is talk radio, it's a news program, pretty informed individuals. I've spoken with them, I've met them, I know them. Rocco Loduca, Jay Aiello, Mark Walfer, who's an attorney, Rocco Loduca, he is a former reporter for the Observer Dispatch. Jay has been involved in radio and politics for many, many years. These are not dumb people. They had no idea. They have virtually no idea about this subject. I know that if I'm talking to people in the industry, in news media, who deal with politics on a regular basis, Professor Luke Perry had almost no idea about absentees. I know more about it than he does, only because of my interaction. He's more of a professor and an academic. I'm real world, political commentator dealing with it directly, so I've had more interactions with this, but I don't know it well. I don't want to misunderstand. This is this area that's kind of gray for everyone. There are certain laws and then there's practices. Like I said, you can violate the law, as it seems Anthony Brindisi did, as I know that Dan Livingston did. And it doesn't mean that the way the law is going to be acted upon is going to be the same as what the law says it should be. There is that difference. So it's a difficult subject, and it's not simple. It's not one of the reasons why no one hears about this. Very simply, you can't make this a 30-second soundbite. Well, actually, yeah, you can. Affidavits are the ability of students from anywhere in the state and possibly out of state, to be able to inject themselves into local politics and alter the outcome by making socialism more real or more of a reality. There's your 30-second soundbite. It's so heavy-handed. It is so one-sided. It is so blatantly political manipulation that no one will use it. And I'm sure I can make a similar statement on the Democratic side. And that would be something like, in 30 seconds, affidavit ballots are your ability to jump in and to kill and stop all of the racism, the sexism that is inherent in modern politics today. This is your ability from anywhere in the state to go into a region and make sure that socialism will thrive. That is the way that it can be worded in 30 seconds as a bullet point on the other side. Both of those statements are heavy-handed. They're useless. They're political traps. They're manipulations. And because this subject really doesn't have a good soundbite, a 30-second answer that isn't absolutely patently obvious on how it's just biased, you don't hear about it. And because it doesn't, unless you have a very close race, so few people are doing it that you're never going to see it. It's not, this has been going on since 2002. No one's ever heard about it. No one's ever talked about it. Why? Because it's almost never happened. Students are the ones who usually do the provisional ballots. Students usually never come out for an election. They never get involved, so no one pays attention to it. There's so few of those affidavits that it's not enough to make it. One, it won't change most elections, and two, it does most elections. But because no one's paying attention, no one sees how it's being used, and so no one cares. But you could see that in a school board election, but no one's counting that. No one's thinking about it. No one's looking for it. And that's where the scary part is. That's where the manipulation comes in, that you can use this as it's being, and now we get to see it in a big race where everyone is paying attention, and you can see, hey, this is a problem. This is a disparity. This is something that's wrong with our election system. The intent was good. The use is bad. We should do something about this. No one wants to talk about it because it's a dry subject. It is not exciting. It is not fun. I get that. It doesn't mean it's not important to talk about. It doesn't mean that we can't take time to explain it. And I hope that I've done a good job of explaining it. And Kevin, please let me know. You or Jennifer or Patricia, Felicia, everybody who's watching this after the fact, and you make it through this. And you know what? I just want to applaud everybody who makes it through this, because I try to make these as interesting as possible. I really do. I really do try and make it as interesting as possible. I try and make it as fun as possible, because it's meant to not only just be a conversation, but also somewhat entertaining, I would like to think. But I gotta thank you guys making it through this and listening to the whole thing and going through the numbers and the conversation. Thank you. You guys are great. And send this out to other people. And it may take a try or two. I know the conversation is dense. I know that it's not fun. And it's not engaging in the way that if I said, when I say that Dan Livingston is a self-admitted criminal, that's engaging. That's exciting. People will go, really? Really? Wait a minute, they elected a self-admitted criminal? Yes, they did. It's a city council in Binghamton. Wow, aren't Democrats proud of that? That's a conversation. And that's something that grabs people's attention. Oh, yeah, I want to know more about that. Yeah. When we have votes that disappear, as we see in the Rick Scott case for governor in Florida, where 100,000 votes magically appeared 3 days after the fact. That's something that people can grab onto. Oh yeah, I want to know more about that. But when we hear something about this is how votes are made, these are the people who can make them, this is how people are being told to use their vote, to influence the vote, to subtly change the vote. No one wants to talk about that because it's not exciting. And I'm not denying it. It's not exciting. It's not the most exciting conversation I've ever had as a podcast. But that makes it no less important to have. So I thank you for appreciating that and for noticing that and for being here with me as we go through this. Because it's tough. It's a tough one. But I hope that the information is important and useful for people to get a better understanding. Especially as, we're going to see next week, there's going to be a lot of back and forth on this. You're going to hear a lot of people talking. There are going to be absentee ballots that are going to get thrown out. There are going to be, not just in New York 22nd, this is happening across the nation. I'm just using the New York 22nd as an example because it is such a high-profile election, because it is such a close race, because we're seeing the media take time to talk about some of these races. They should be talking about more of them, and they should be talking about this one as a prime example, but it's dry. So they don't want to. But this is something that's important because you're going to see this in 2020, in the presidential election, that election cycle, that race. You're going to see more of this. This was the test run. In my opinion, this was a test run. This is proof of concept that they can get students out and to use provisional ballots to affect the outcome of local races without raising as much attention as it should, and to be able to manipulate the outcomes. I think that's what we're going to see. And they're probably going to get away with it because nobody wants to talk about it. Because it's boring. Because it's not a fun subject and people aren't emotionally, ooh, like someone saying, I just magically found 15,000 ballots. That's something everyone goes, oh my God, I understand that. 15,000 ballots. Where'd they come from? How could they possibly? That sounds like bias. Well, so does a provisional ballot that is controlled overwhelmingly by individuals outside of the region they're voting in with no knowledge about that region. That terrifies me. That terrifies me. But I'm a political junkie. I'm a former congressional candidate. I talk to politicians every day, almost. So I'm a little outside the norm. I get that. Doesn't mean it's not important, though. And yes, it's boring. It bores me sometimes, too. When you read through, when you're reading through statistics and data, some of it, yeah, it's not the most exciting reading I've ever had in my life, whether it's politics or not. But it is important, and that's why I do the reading. And that's why I take the time to speak with you, because I don't expect everyone to spend the 6 hours of data that I'm doing to do that on stuff that's really not exciting and doesn't come up very often. But I do plan to speak to the Board of Elections to go into some of these numbers, to get the data, and analyze it. And I should mention that on November 19th at Vestal Public Library, I have been invited by the Americans for Restoring the Constitution. They're going to have an event at 7 p.m. I'm going to start speaking. It's a 2-hour event talking about the election of the 2018 election and how that's going to have an impact on the nation. Talking about some of the numbers and how I'll talk about the voter suppression, talking about voter manipulation, talking about the result of who we have now in charge. And I don't just mean Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the federal level, who, in my opinion, is a complete moron and knows nothing. That's bad, but that's only one vote. Although there are more of her, and there will be more of her coming. But let's look at it on a local level even. In the state level, we're looking at the New York State Senate is now Democrat. And they support their Democrat leader in the state, Governor Cuomo, a man well rumored to be completely corrupt, though it has never been proven, a man whose economic policies have been so ineffective that people have run out of this state at record levels. We're like the top 3 for 3 years, and people exiting the state. I mean, U-Haul is loving us right now. We're probably a profit center like they've never seen before. So many people are leaving New York State. And yet he got reelected. That's a consequence. And because the state Senate is now Democratic, the issues that Governor Cuomo is promoting on his path to the 2020 presidential nomination that he hopes for, because we all know he's running for president, no matter what he wants to tell people, he's trying to be president of the United States. So when we take that into account and we think about it for a second, things like, what does that mean? Well, that means we're going to see higher taxes. We're going to see the red flag legislation and restrictions on gun owners. We're going to see the minimum wage increase across the entire state with no compromise for upstate New York, which can't afford it, driving out more people and more businesses and increasing the amount of unemployment throughout the state. We're going to see probably an implementation of Medicare for all, which means we're going to affect the health care of everyone in the state and double everyone's taxes and give them a lower quality of care at a higher cost. But it will be everyone in the state. You're going to see probably the guaranteed jobs for all, which is basically everyone is guaranteed a job. Doing what? Who knows? Paid for by whom? The state, apparently. Which is a question. Where we're going to get the money to pay for that? On top of the money, we're going to have to pay for health care. On top of the fact that we're losing population and businesses and unemployment's going up. Where we're going to employ these people? The government doesn't have a business. The business of the government is take people's money and, well, that's basically it. That and protect people. But we now see government doing way, way more. But essentially, the government doesn't create anything. Well, we're going to create more divisions of people who are going to enforce regulations on the fewer and fewer people who are left. We're going to regulate each other. I mean, we're going to have one division regulating another division that regulates the public. It makes no sense to me. It's not clear. It doesn't make any sense. There is no articulation on this. It's just an idea that will get passed that has no effective reality. It's kind of scary. And it drives me nuts. But these are some of the consequences, and I'll go into it in greater detail with more clarity once we get there. By the way, I should also mention, as I said earlier, I had received a document about the violation of election law by Anthony Brindisi. The document, which I didn't have a chance to upload and make available to the public, it was submitted by Mr. Heath Phillips in April. And the response, as I said, was on November 7th from the Federal Election Commission, and it's signed by Lisa J. Stevenson, the Acting General Counsel, and by Jeff S. Jordan, Assistant General Counsel. So I just want to make sure this isn't something I just pulled out. I do have the document. It's on here. You can't see it. But that's where I got that information from, because I know there's some DC supporter out there who's going to see this and go, you just made that up. No, I didn't. It's out there. And you can look it up. It is reported. It is recorded federally. So there's that. But I am finishing up. We're just about at the end here today. I thank everyone always for being involved. And I see Heather Omicha joined in as well. Hi, Heather. Didn't forget about you. I didn't see it immediately. It's been an interesting conversation. I hope everyone has been enjoying it. I'm just checking the different comments they get while I'm on here with you. But I want to see how this is interesting to me. It's important to me. I think it's important to all of us. Over the next week, we're going to see a lot more information about it. Hopefully now people will have a better understanding of what is an absentee vote, what is an affidavit vote, who are making them, what do they tend to do, and will those results be what we see when the final count is done. A final count, by the way, and I just want to throw this in. It scares me that up until about a day ago, the absentee ballots and the affidavit ballots were just sitting on a couple of desks in different parts of the county. Anyone had access to them at any given moment and could throw out any number of them. It scares me because they only got locked up just about 2 days ago because of a federal court order. But they had to make the court order because they were just laying around. That's scary. That's scary, folks. And I get that from some of my sources that were aware of this happening in a couple of different counties. But that's, scary news. There's a lot going on in our elections that people don't pay attention to that are really important. But hopefully people will be able to pay attention to it now and understand it better and be able to, as you read and hear stories and news stories come out, you'll be able to have a better understanding of it. And maybe we can move forward that way. But with that said, I want to thank everyone for being here today. You guys make it all worthwhile. I thank each and every one of you every time. You guys are great. I hope to see you all in Vestal, New York, where we'll be at the Vestal Public Library starting at 7 p.m. with the Americans for the Restoration of the Constitution. I'll be speaking, the featured speaker. I look forward to talking to everyone there. And until then, I want everyone to be safe.